Thank you, President. I'd also, of course, like to thank the Congress for having invited me to participate here again. And this brings me back to a chamber for which in which I sat for many years as a member of Parliament. Now, the subject that you're dealing with and the question which you asked me to address a few views to you about is one which is particularly significant in the political life of today, because we all know how democracy, representative democracy, is also faced with major changes. On the one hand, representative democracy is subject to major changes which are due to the present time. We are living in a time which is much more, in which speed is accelerated, the time of internet, communication in real time, and all of this means that things are sped up, and this also has a knock-on effect on politics and the way in which it operates, and particularly it is becoming clearer and clearer from our day-to-day experience that there is a contradiction between the time or even tempo of society, which is speeding up all the time, and a time or the tempo at which political decisions have to be taken. Their tempi are quite different. So if we're talking about the different times, the different tempi of society and decision makers, there is a certain gap in the way in which decision-making takes place. Now, representative democracy today has to also deal with the whole question of space, and this has been a very strong area because it was built in historical times and in the area or space of society and nation states. But today we're living in a global world, and sometimes the decisions are taken in a way which escapes national sovereignty, and sometimes citizens realize that decisions are taken not by the bodies which they represent, but the decisions which are taken by elsewhere other than where the elected representatives take these decisions. So the question of communication, of course, we're dealing with internet. This has changed our life considerably, and it means just in a few seconds you can have information, you can send messages, that you can send communications, that you can find out reports. These are something which completely changes the way in which politics takes place and the relations between citizens and their elected representatives. I'd just like to talk about various points. That's the change to time, the change to space, and the way in which we act today. If we're talking about communication, we've got to find new instruments of political participation which would make it possible for citizens to be able to rebuild relations between between close relations at neighborhood level and politics as well. Because at the same time, I have to say that today, very often, we find ourselves in a very different frame of mind. The economic and social crisis, this has introduced into the life of millions of women and men, and particularly young people, as a feeling of precariousness, of uncertainty, and this makes it much more difficult for many people to look at the policy of institutions with trust and with hope. So it isn't only a question of structural changes to the way in which we live, and these are essential to be able to look at new ways in which we can establish policies and links between policy and citizens and our different policies, but also to put us in a situation. It means that people are waiting all the time. They're in a state of expectancy. They are hoping that there won't be a further deterioration in their disappointment and expectations of the future. And this means that we have got to renew our way of thinking about things. We've got to try to develop instruments which would make it possible for citizens to be players in their own lives, to be called upon to make decisions. I'd just like to tell you that a few days ago in France there was an experiment carried out. 2.5 million citizens, French citizens, participated in the consultation of the primaries to choose their candidate for the Socialist Party in the presidential elections next year. Now, in Italy, About 7 years ago, we did the same thing where the first time the primary consultations were held in 2005 to choose the candidate to guide the centre-left coalition for the country. And after 2005, there was a consultation in the primaries in which almost 5 million citizens participated. Then initially we repeated this experience, and not only in selecting the leaders, political leaderships at national level, but also with regard to the leaders at local level. I myself was elected just a few months ago mayor of the city of Torino, but before I was elected mayor, I was selected by the primaries, in which there were hundreds of thousands of citizens of my city, and so this gave a certain backing, a certain weight to my selection as candidate to be mayor. So I'm just saying that there may be some instruments which will make it possible to recreate conditions of trust and representation between the citizens, and also to build in this way a capacity for politics to be able to interpret the needs and requests of our citizens and to translate them into a form in which our citizens can recognize themselves. Now, there are many examples of instruments of democratic participation which have occurred and become practice over the last few years, particularly since we are in a Congress of Administrators of local and regional authorities. I think the most interesting examples which we can find, and which have occurred in many European countries, have taken place at local level, because obviously the local dimension, this is one which is quantitatively very important, because it makes it possible for citizens to participate and be active in choosing instruments which make it possible for citizens to be actively involved. And I think that as far as this is concerned, we need to make progress, and we need to be brave, and we need, I think, to make our citizens participate in the choices concerning their lives, to make it possible for citizens to take their own destiny in their own hands, and therefore to be able to bring about a capacity for renewal in politics, which would open up the life of institutions to the participation of our citizens, and first and foremost, young people. We need to change the language of politics. Often this is something which belongs to the past. It belongs to another time. It means that we have to renew the forms of the organization of politics in looking as well at more flexible, more dynamic, more mobile forms of politics, and we need to begin relations between the forms and institutions of politics and more dialectical means of discussion with our citizens. We need to establish means of democratic participation. I gave the example of the primaries, but there are other instruments as well which could be selected, which would give citizens a guarantee that the decisions are taken, take into consideration the will and wishes of the citizens, and the wills and wishes that they express. In other words, we are now faced with a major challenge, that of redefining the profile of representative democracy and the way in which our democratic institutions are run. And this also means that we've got to renew politics, its way of being, and the relations we have with the citizens. This is something which is quite difficult to do. It's not a simple challenge, but from this challenge, we might be able to restore to politics its credibility. Often it doesn't have this, and to restore to institutions the true relations with the citizens, and so that they can trust us. We need to be closer to our citizens. We need to be closer to citizens, to society, and to policies, because this will be able to give hope to our citizens and to ensure that we can resolve problems and also to ensure our citizens that they will be able to have